Welcome in, everybody, to the Flagship Podcast. I am Chip Brown of Horns247.com, joined by Nick Osen, publisher of CycloneAlert.com on the 24/7 Sports Network. It's where you get all your Cyclone information as Texas prepares to take on Iowa State Saturday at 11 a.m. at DKR on either ABC or ESPN2, they're telling us. And Nick, thanks for joining us. First of all, I'm looking at Iowa State and I'm seeing this monster defense, this Sudoku puzzle of a defense. No one can seem to figure out. They're holding teams way below their scoring average. And then I see Iowa State's offense and special teams, and I just want to say, what is going on here? Because this is, statistically the best defense in the Big 12, and offensively they've scored one touchdown in their last two games. They've lost three straight to Baylor, to Kansas, to K-State, but they lost to Kansas 14-11. They lost to K-State 10-9. I mean, this is like old school leather helmet football, Nick.
It really is. We talked just a hair before we kind of got on here about how good this Iowa State defense has been. And it's the truth. It's not just the defense compared to the offense and the special teams. It's one of the best units easily in the Big 12, potentially the country. I mean, they keep this team truly in every game. But the way that the offense has struggled, the special teams has in a few games, it's been a little better, at least this weekend that we just saw. But the offense, it's got way too much talent to kind of be performing the way that it is. Hunter Dekkers, this is his first year really starting, and he can make just about every throw. He's fairly mobile. He's got all of the trust and confidence of his teammates, but they just haven't really been able to put these things together. And then I know we'll, get a little more into, obviously, the Longhorns, but just the way that I saw them play on Saturday, it's kind of like two teams that are, kind of coming into this game truly polar opposites. I mean, Texas just looks like it's firing on all cylinders, whereas the Cyclones have shown glimpses. And again, the thing is, even as poorly as they've looked, they were maybe a catch and 10 yards away from winning that game on Saturday, potentially comfortably. There were just a couple drop passes that would have been touchdowns, a bad miss on a sack that actually wouldn't have even allowed a K-State touchdown at all. So there's a lot of good, but they just haven't done enough to execute. And that's why instead of, 4-2 or 5-1, they're sitting at 3-3 right now.
Well, what is it? Because you're right. You've got Hunter Dekkers. He's thrown for 11 touchdowns, tied for the lead in the Big 12 in touchdown passes coming into last weekend. Xavier Hutchinson is leading the Big 12 in receiving. He's been, a big time weapon. Obviously there's been some injury issues with Jarrell Brock at running back, but tell us what, as you size up this Iowa State offense, what's missing?
Yeah. So I think generally it's consistency. And once you get into it a little bit more, really the run game. Since Iowa State's gotten into Big 12 play, they have not been able to consistently run that ball at all. And so part of it, you kind of step back and look, like you mentioned, all right, the number one running back, Jarrell Brock, I'd say essentially has missed a game and a half. He missed just about all of the Jayhawks game, and then just truly was not close to himself over the weekend against Kansas State, which is certainly unfortunate. They've missed some games from true freshman running back Cartavius Norton, who has gotten a lot of buzz, especially since the spring. Good speed, but a really good young physical running back. So that's been hurting. And then the other, two tailbacks that have really gotten in are talented, but they're just not as complete, or they can't be, kind of counted on as much in pass pro and things like that. So it's just gotten a little tough. And it's interesting because, some of the areas you'd maybe look at there, like the offensive line, they looked really good in pass pro over the weekend. Dekkers had a lot of time on a lot of major plays against Kansas State. And as I'm sure you know, the Wildcats have a good front. So it's kind of hard to look like, okay, it's just injuries. Okay, they're not kind of getting enough push. I feel that it's really a multitude of things, but I think that the offense isn't coming together as much because they like to run the football and they just haven't gotten it together for a couple of those, reasons in Big 12 play against some tough defenses as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question when you talk about having played Baylor and Kansas State and even KU, because KU is much improved as we've seen. They just suffered their first loss against TCU, but it was a one possession game.
Mm-hmm.
So what needs to happen I mean, they're a pretty good passing offense. I mean, if you look at the numbers, they're certainly a better passing offense than they are a run defense. That's not really they've been pretty balanced under Matt Campbell. So that's kind of a new twist to just be, a pass first offense or an offense that passes to set up the run. But you kind of have to go with what your strengths are, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that Campbell touched on that a little bit this weekend post game because someone, kind of asked about a lot of targets being focused to the star wideout Xavier Hutchinson. And it does seem at times like Deckers kind of locks in on him throughout the play. But along those same lines, as true as that is, I would push back. You like to play to your strengths, like you mentioned, and get the best players the ball. And Xavier Hutchinson is a top 8 to 12, receiver in the entire country. And he came into the weekend leading the whole country in catches. And I believe targets as well, top of the Big 12 with things. So they've got other weapons. I do feel that it is just, kind of nothing has really gone right in terms of health for some prominent players, like I mentioned. And I just feel like they're just short, like Campbell even mentioned, we feel like we're kind of inches away, not miles. And I would tend to agree with that, even if, it's kind of a generalized statement because we talked about some of the scores to open. They've been so close. The defense has kept them in, and the offense has even put in some positions late to kind of get over that hump, even if they haven't executed well enough. There was a tough drop from Hutchinson over the weekend late in the fourth. Obviously, some of the special team struggles showed in Lawrence a week and a half ago. I was there. So it just feels like when some things are going smoothly and the ball is moving and things like that, they just can't really get over that final hump. So I think that's part of an issue. They're trying to get the best players the ball. Brock when healthy, Hutchinson obviously when he's out there, but it just hasn't all come together. And the good thing is they started off 3-0, so they have a few wins, in their pockets. But the tough thing is their schedule does not get too much easier, starting with this trip to Austin here.
Yeah, I mean, it's been like you can't make this stuff up kind of stuff because obviously Jace Gilbert, the freshman kicker for Iowa State, struggles mightily in the loss against Kansas and then comes through in the game against K-State, but it's just not quite enough. I mean, Iowa State led that game 9-7, and it was all Jace Gilbert field goals. But K-State kicks a field goal with 7 minutes left in the game to take a 10-9 lead and then was able to make it hold up. So kudos to Jace Gilbert for bouncing back after a really tumultuous day in Lawrence, right?
Yeah, that was kind of a big talking point over the weekend. And, there was this kind of feeling like, okay, he's come back. He's put in the work. He's had a good game against the Wildcats. Is he even going to get the full chance to kick what would have been a game-winning field goal that Iowa State was driving towards? And that would have been an incredible story. Really talented kid. I was able to talk with him when he committed. True freshman, as we mentioned. Really starred in several sports in high school coming out of Oklahoma, one of the best athletes in the entire state. But it was impressive to have that kind of confidence and to be able to come back like that under the lights against a really good opponent, as we talked about with Kansas State and that defense. It wasn't quite enough. And I think it would have been a really cool story, the ultimate kind of short-term redemption there, to have had a game like that in Lawrence and then to have potentially put up all the points for an Iowa State team. Obviously, he did that, but it would have been much sweeter, of course, if they'd gotten the victory.
Yeah, and just talk about that, the way that game ended, because Iowa State had the ball. They tried to throw it, and they couldn't complete. I mean, what he connected with Jalen Knoll for 3 yards on 3rd and 10, and then on 4th and 7, an incomplete pass. So they definitely tried to throw the football, which has been the strength of the offense, but just couldn't make it happen.
Yeah, they needed to throw, like you mentioned, a strength, and just with the health issues to guys like Norton and Brock, it was, I'm not sure I'd say a full broken play, but there was certainly something that, didn't look perfect initially on that 4th down, and Deckers kind of kept the play alive a little bit, found an open Xavier Hutchinson along the sidelines, and especially in that moment, it was a really good ball. I mean, it was right in his hands, and he legitimately had it. And then as his knees were kind of going to the ground and he was falling out, he lost it. And initially from the press box, it looked like, he had caught it and Iowa State was going to keep that drive alive. And I'd say really only need to gain another maybe 10 to 14 yards to give Gilbert a great shot for that win. But it felt like every time Iowa State kind of made something happen, especially on the defensive side of the ball, the offense just wasn't necessarily able to return the favor. And it gets really tough, but you have to be able to, kind of execute and capitalize on those drives and extra possessions and forced turnovers. And when the Cyclones have gotten those turnovers and, kind of extra spots where they maybe didn't even expect to have the ball, they just haven't turned those into 6. And against good offenses like a Texas coming up, you don't really have a great shot if you're not able to do that.
Yeah, this is going to be a really good test for Texas in terms of how far this offense has come, and with Quinn Ewers kind of getting back in the saddle at quarterback after getting off to a great start against Oklahoma. 14 of 16 passing. They get up 21-0. He had a 222 quarterback rating, but Iowa State has just locked everybody down. Let's take a quick break here on the Flagship Podcast. Talking to Nick Osen of CycloneAlert.com, sizing up the Longhorns and Cyclones, who will meet on Saturday at DKR at 11 a.m. The Cyclones have lost 3 straight. Texas trying to get its season back together after the loss at Texas Tech a couple of weeks ago. We'll be right back. And if you're watching us on the Horns 24/7 YouTube channel, we'll roll on with Nick. And Nick, I'll just, before we move on to the defense, if there is a sort of natural step this offense needs to take, or if there's a player who's emerging, a tight end, maybe another receiver, or who's that guy? I mean, you almost feel for Tom Manning, the offensive coordinator, who's been in the NFL, came back to Iowa State. I mean, the guy's, he's been solid. So, I mean, our fans, who are they mad at? Because we always know fans are mad when a team they're used to winning is losing.
Yeah, so this is my first full season covering this team, especially football, obviously. And they've almost been, it seems, every time I, really go on social media or things like that, a lot of the focus seems to be kind of upset with, some of the play calling. And Manning's name is thrown out there a lot. And I don't think that's, fair. And I certainly respect the way that Campbell has kind of approached these things. He kind of mentioned, post game this weekend, if you're mad about the offense, or he's like, I sit in the offensive room, come for me. And I really respect that as a head coach. I don't think that anybody on the staff or the players or the team would think anybody has been perfect this season, but I don't think it's fair, especially with the injuries I mentioned, going against good defenses, to kind of always, just put it on one person. I mean, that doesn't seem fair to me. I don't think it's accurate. You mentioned the success Tom Manning has had. There's certainly been a lot of talent here, but I think that he's also brought out, some of the best in some of those players as well that have been here before, like Hutchinson, who's still here, Brock Purdy, Breece Hall, Charlie Kohler, that are all in the NFL. I think that maybe expectations got a little bit high this year after Iowa State finally beat Iowa. And I think that some of them were still reasonable. I mean, I was certainly picking the Cyclones to win some of these Big 12 games that they hadn't. But I would say the fans seem to kind of be having issues with a lot of the play calling, which I don't think is, the issue all the time. I don't think it's necessarily fair. And then in terms of someone that I think could be focused on a little bit more in a good way and brought more to the offense a little bit to kind of help its execution and success is Dimitri Stanley. It was interesting. He had two of his best games, weeks 4 and 5 against Baylor and Kansas. And I've been really impressed with Stanley. I think that he brings an element of kind of stretching the field and route running ability that not everybody necessarily has on this team. And they were featuring him. And so I'm not sure if it was just the way Kansas State played it or there was just a little disconnect over the weekend, but he wasn't featured as much. I think that is a player that can be focused on a lot more. And I think that many areas of the offense truly can be upgraded and fixed and worked on. And it doesn't come down to, one person or one area, because it just doesn't make sense, especially when you look and see there have kind of been different problems every week, like the special teams game in Kansas. And then at the end of this game, it was just an area of execution, because I fully believe the Cyclones would have picked up one more first down and kicked a game-winning field goal. And I think Gilbert would have made it the way he was looking at Jack Trice Stadium. So I think that's probably the best way to answer that question. It's certainly been a little surprising to see. I know this is my first year here, but that's kind of what I've seen and what I figure right now.
Well, when you look at the Cyclones defense, let's move there, because to me, they're the gold standard in the Big 12. John Haycock, literally people are patterning their defenses after what he's done with that 3-8 cloud defense. Talk about, they've lost guys, Mike Rose and, some big time playmakers, but they do have, Orion Vance back. Talk about this Iowa State defense and what makes it go.
Yeah, I really couldn't be more impressed by it. I think it's one of the best units in the country, and I feel that there is a lot of talent. I think they've got several guys that will be able to play on Sundays, but I think it's a testament to the staff as well. Haycock, Dion Broomfield with the safeties, Matt Capone with the corners, Tyson Veit, linebackers, and then Eli Rashid with the D-line. Every unit has had some really good games. I think that the what you called it, 3-8 cloud, or a lot of people say 3-3-5 stack, I feel that that's a really good scheme and game plan, and I think that the personnel works pretty well with it as well. In terms of kind of getting into things a little bit, Will McDonald, one of the best, potentially players, certainly edge rushers in the country, is still here, and he's had two of his best games of the year in the last 3 weeks. MJ Anderson, who's a transfer from Minnesota, has really come on. He's a guy, and, Coach Eli Rashid was pretty consistent about this coming into the year. He said he was someone that can really get to the passer. That's exactly what he has shown. Orion Vance, someone that's been around a long time and great leader, can produce. And then you get to the secondary, which I'm incredibly high on this group. Anthony Johnson has some NFL buzz, Senior Bowl buzz, things like that.
State game.
Yeah.
Anthony Johnson chasing down Malik Knowles, punching that ball out. I mean, it's a 68-yard touchdown.
Yep.
And Anthony Johnson tracks him down, punches the ball out, forces a touchback. Unbelievable play. Anthony Johnson's stud.
Yeah, that's the type of player he is, the type of kind of person that he brings out within the team. Bo Freeler, I think that I'd be surprised if he didn't get to the NFL in a year and a half or 2.5 years. He's just a true sophomore. He kind of shines coming up in the run, but has a couple PBUs this year as well. And then the corners have been pretty consistent too. I wouldn't say K-State was their best game they've had, but still, they don't allow many players to get past them and a lot of long gains. That's generally TJ Tampa and Miles Purchase. So I would say, at least 4 or 5 guys will get to that next level. And this year, man, I just feel like they approach everything the right way. Even Johnson, who had the big play, like you mentioned, was talking post-game with us and basically saying, we didn't play well. The defense didn't play well because they allowed 10 points, and you can't win if you don't score. Yep, talking about for the other team. So it's certainly interesting. I feel like I'm writing about them every week, either, about how well they've graded or just the big plays. But they've been terrific, and they're going to get a heck of a test with the Longhorns, because every time I turn on that TV when, Ewers is actually behind center, he's impressing a lot. And I think a few of the wideouts, of course, Worthy had a good game this weekend as well. But he's just able to kind of find everybody. Robinson in the backfield, terrific player. So Cyclones are going to have their hands full this week.
Yeah, this is going to be a really, the marquee matchup, no doubt, is that Texas offense against that Iowa State defense. And, Matt Campbell, he's beloved, right, at Iowa State. Have they built a statue for him yet? Are there plans? The guy is beloved there, but he's had some quirky, Septembers haven't gone great. He finally solved the Iowa problem. I've always said, why doesn't he have a special teams coordinator? Because special teams have gotten him in the past. He had a game against Baylor a couple of years ago where, gave up some long returns. Like, they lost the game on special teams. He still does not have a special teams coordinator, does he?
Not like a technically just for that. No, not exactly that.
He divides that stuff up amongst the assistants. And I know Jamie Pollard will give him whatever he wants. I've just always wondered why he doesn't have that special teams coordinator. But talk about, Matt Campbell and what he's saying right now, because he said the offense is close. I think Iowa State fans are saying we've scored 1 touchdown in 2 games. So what does close mean?
Yeah, so they do have kind of like a special teams. I think the exact term is like analyst this year. So, something new, but not quite that. And, I'm probably just going to sound generic with this too, but I fully believe it because of all the examples I've laid out for you in terms of late execution and being so close. One thing, I think Campbell's a really good coach. I think he's a really good person from what I have kind of seen and been around so far as well. And one thing I really like and respect about him is he's not afraid to kind of throw, like I said, himself and his name in that group of, some of the issues that have been going on. I don't think the injuries are an excuse, but I feel like with the top 2 running backs, the way Iowa State likes to play and run offense, I just feel like the offense can't necessarily hit the potential without even one of those guys healthy. And he's also just kind of talked about inconsistency. That was a big word, this weekend after the Kansas State game, because there's a lot of good. I've been able to see it in every game, even some good things on offense. Like I mentioned, how much time Decker's had sometimes. Early on, there were a couple deep shots. Deckers is very comfortable with those. They found success. I mentioned Stanley. I think they need to get Jalen Knoll more involved, but that was kind of the big things coming out of this weekend, inconsistency and cleaning things up and just continuing to build. And he had a really interesting quote. It was something like, I told the kids, he said, winners do lose sometimes, but losers hide. And I'm not hiding from this. None of us are hiding from this. So I kind of took that as, they're not afraid to really say or admit things aren't where they're supposed to be, and there might be some issues. But I fully believe, just being around Campbell and the staff and these players, I don't take them as kind of a, giving up or quitting type of group. I mean, I'm sure it hurts, especially the way some of these have been so close, and kind of the lack of execution has just proved to be so high and so important. But whether it's this week or after the bye week, I do see a turnaround, just because I feel that there's too much talent and too many good coaches not to.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be fascinating, and the game is going to be on ABC. So tune in, folks, for Texas fans. They're going to want to see if Texas can keep this mojo going. And for Iowa State fans, certainly that defense has been unbelievable. Anything else, Nick, that you think is important for Texas fans to know about this team? Any interesting storylines, players, you name it. You tell us.
Yeah, I can give you, a couple things. So I feel that health it will be very imperative, as obvious as that sounds. I think that Iowa State really needs Jirel Brock or Norton in this game to kind of have a chance to milk some more of that clock, keep Texas's great offense off of the field. I think that will prove paramount. And then we haven't gotten a ton of clarity in terms of kind of the severity of this, but one of the starting linebackers, Colby Reeder, went out in the Iowa State-Kansas State game, and he was down for a little bit. It didn't look great, but, I mean, Campbell, kind of in some general terms, didn't seem to think it was something long-term, at least post-game. So those are certainly a few players that, are notable in terms of health and kind of what's been going on. And then I'll mention Dimitri Stanley again. I think he's a name that if Iowa State has a chance in what I figure to be a little bit more of an up-tempo game, he'll be someone that needs to be involved for the Cyclones to find some success in Austin.
Well, it's going to be an interesting game for sure. That marquee matchup, the Texas offense against the Iowa State defense. This is one of the games where Texas held a lead in the second half last year before losing the game. And Texas players were talking about a revenge tour, that Oklahoma was the first stop on the revenge tour. Iowa State was also the site of where Bo Davis, the defensive line coach, laid into some players on the team bus on the way out of Ames last year after that 30-7 Iowa State win, where they scored 27 unanswered points in the second half to win that game. So Iowa State will be heavy on Texas's mind this week. Nick, really appreciate you joining us here on the Flagship Podcast to help break down the Cyclones. And of course, get over to cyclonealert.com for all the updates this week. For Nick Osen, I am Chip Brown. Thanks so much for joining us here on the Flagship Podcast. Until next time, we'll see you over at horns247.com. Stay safe and keep the faith.